My husband stood in front of a room full of people and told them I could barely remember my own name. He parked me in a wheelchair. He tucked a blanket over my knees like I was already halfway into the grave. Then he leaned down close to my ear and whispered that by morning I would wake up in a locked room with no windows, while he and the woman he was sleeping with owned everything I had spent my life building. So I reached down, I unlocked the wheels, and I stood up on my own 2 feet. No shaking, no confusion, nothing he had promised them they would see. His champagne glass hit the floor and shattered, and I said in a voice a hell of a lot steadier than his $18 million for a company carrying 21 million in debt. You really should have read the attachments. My name is Adele Ridgway. I am 62 years old, and for almost 30 years, I made my living catching people who believed numbers would lie for them if you paid them enough. Numbers never lie. People do. It took me a long time and a price I am still counting to learn those are two different things. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. And please stay with me until the end. Because to understand how I ended up standing in that room, you have to go back 3 weeks to a dinner 30 floors above Charleston Harbor, where I sat very still and listened to my husband put a dollar figure on the rest of my life. The restaurant was the kind of place that does not hand you a menu. Every course arrived like a small sculpture on a black slate plate, and the waiters moved so quiet you never saw them coming until the food was already in front of you. Grant had picked it on purpose. He wanted to impress the woman sitting across from us, and men, like Grant, have always believed that a big enough check can make a person forget to ask questions. Her name was Sloane Merritt. She was 46, sharp in a charcoal suit, the kind of woman who wears one thin gold bracelet and lets it do all the talking. Grant had introduced her to me a month earlier as a strategic partner, somebody whose private equity fund could help Ridgway Forensic grow past what I had built it into. That was the story. What he did not say, what I would not understand for another few days, was that she had already been inside my company, inside my accounts, and judging by the way his hand kept drifting toward hers on the table, inside my marriage too. Try the fish, sweetheart, Grant said, and he lifted a bite toward my mouth with his own fork. You barely touched your lunch. His voice was soft, patient, designed for an audience. That was the thing I had learned about cruelty over the years. The practiced kind almost never sounds cruel out loud. It sounds worried. It adjusts your collar. It finishes your sentences before you can. It tells the whole table you are tired before you have said a single word. I opened my mouth, and I ate the damn bite, because that was the role. And Grant smiled at Sloane like he deserved a medal for feeding his own wife. Adele has had a rough few weeks, he told her, lowering his voice like I could not hear it from a foot away. Little lapses, gets her days confused. Nothing serious, we hope. I just try not to overwhelm her with the business side of things anymore. I counted 3 slow breaths before I answered. I still understand my own company, Grant. He set his hand over mine on the tablecloth. To anyone watching, it looked tender. His fingers tightened just enough to be a warning. Of course you do, he said. I only mean you deserve to rest. You earned it. Sloane gave me a smooth, expensive smile. Your reputation is remarkable, Mrs. Ridgway, she said. The Delacroix embezzlement case is still taught in half the forensic accounting programs in the country. Thank you, I said. I built that firm from one client and a folding table. 28 years. You do not forget how something like that gets made. Grant laughed light and easy. She remembers 1990 better than she remembers yesterday, he said, and Sloane laughed with him, and something behind my ribs went very quiet. Here is what Grant did not know. He had spent 6 years standing next to my work, and in all that time he never once bothered to learn how a forensic accountant actually thinks. He knew the invoices and the press clippings and the awards on the wall. He did not know that my whole life was built on one skill, the ability to sit in a room while people who assume you are not paying attention say numbers out loud, and to hold every one of those numbers in my head until they line up into a shape. He thought my head for figures was gone, so he talked in front of me like I was furniture. The evaluation is still on for next week, he said to Sloane, and he said it in the flat, careful tone people use for things they do not want repeated. Frey submits his report Thursday. He says the progression is right on schedule. And the dosage, Sloan said, not really a question. Bumped it 4 days ago, Grant said. She called the neighbor by the wrong name Tuesday. Twice. I picked up my water glass and I let my hand shake, and I missed the rim on the first try, and a little water ran down onto the cloth. Grant reached over and steadied my hand for me, all tenderness, his thumb pressing hard into the inside of my wrist. Careful, he murmured, out loud, in English, for the room. Then he went back to the quiet voice. 2 more slips in public and Frey has everything he needs. Once the court signs off, I control the vote and I can approve the sale before the monitorship goes public and the number moves on us. Sloan lifted her wine. How much is she in for? She said. The old woman. What does she actually think is happening? She thinks she's losing her mind, Grant said. And every single day, I make sure that's the easiest thing for her to believe. I want you to understand that I did not break at that table. Breaking is loud and it is fast. This was the other thing, the slow thing, the cold that moves through you when love has finally run out of excuses. For months, I had been misplacing pieces of myself. I forgot appointments I had always kept. I woke up with headaches that scraped at the back of my eyes. I stumbled on a staircase I had walked 10,000 times. And every single time, Grant was right there afterward, worried sick, ready with another pill and another glass of water, and another gentle reminder that I was getting older and I needed to slow down. I had started to be afraid of my own mind. And a woman who is afraid of her own mind is the easiest thing in the world to steer. Once you stop trusting your own memory, you start borrowing somebody else's version of what happened. Grant had made sure his was the only version left in the house. I let my spoon slip out of my fingers. It cracked against the edge of the plate, loud enough that a waiter glanced over. Grant turned to me right away, the concern snapping back onto his face like he flipped a switch. Adele, you okay? I blinked at him. I'm sorry, my hand. I don't know. It's all right, he said. For Sloan. Wiping a drop of sauce off my sleeve and then sighing like caring for me had aged him 10 years. These things happen. He looked at Sloan and gave a small, sad shake of his head, and for just a fraction of a second, before the worry came back down over it, I saw the thing underneath. Satisfaction. He was not afraid of me falling apart. He needed me to. Every drop spoon was a deposit into an account he was building against me. I gave Sloan a weak, embarrassed smile, the smile of a woman disappearing inside herself. Forgive me, I said. I'm just tired tonight. She saw exactly what I wanted her to see. What she did not see was the woman I had actually been for 30 years, sitting across a deposition table from men in better suits than Grant will ever own, watching them lie, saying nothing, and letting them dig the hole all the way to the bottom before I ever picked up a shovel. They think the least important person in the room cannot understand them. That is the exact moment they tell you everything. We went home that night through the rain, and Grant drove because he always drove after business dinners. And I sat in the passenger seat with my purse in my lap, and I did not say one word. He thought I was foggy. I was not foggy, I was doing arithmetic. When we got in, he brought me 3 pale capsules and a glass of water and kissed my forehead and told me to take my medicine and get some sleep. I put the pills under my tongue. I drank. I swallowed nothing. And after he left the room, I spit them into a tissue and I went to the old lacquered box in the back of my closet where I keep the notebook. I have kept a notebook my entire career. Dates, times, dollar amounts, the boring bones of every case. Old habit. For the last several months, I had also, without really admitting why, been writing down the bad mornings, the headaches, the lost words, the days the floor seemed to tilt. And that night, for the first time, I sat down on the closet floor and I read it the way I would read a suspect's bank records. Not as a scared old woman, as an examiner, and the pattern jumped off the page. Real cognitive decline has a shape, it drifts, it gets worse in a slow, ugly, more or less steady line. What I had was not a line, it was spikes, sharp, ugly spikes of confusion and dizziness and lost time, and every single one of them landed 1 to 2 days after Grant changed something. A new supplement, a refilled bottle, a dose he was suddenly very insistent I not skip. In between, on the days I forgot to take them, on the days I was traveling, my head was clear as a bell. No disease does that, a dose does that. I sat on that floor a long time with the notebook open in my lap, and I did not cry and I did not shake. I felt that cold move all the way through me and settle, the same cold I feel the moment a set of clean-looking books cracks open and shows me the fraud underneath. Except this time, the books were my own body. My own husband had been feeding me poison out of his own hand, and I had been thanking him for it. I closed the notebook. I put it back in the box, and I sat there in the dark thinking one very clear thought, in a voice that was not afraid at all. Okay, Grant, let's see who actually knows how to count. The morning after that dinner, I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life, which was nothing. I made Grant his coffee. I let him kiss the top of my head. I let him remind me, slow and gentle like he was talking to a child, that doctor. Frey wanted to see me Thursday and that I should not worry myself trying to remember why. I said, okay. I said, thank you. I stood at the kitchen window in my robe and watched him back out of the driveway. And the whole time, there was a voice in the back of my skull screaming at me to grab a knife, to call the cops, to throw the coffee in his lying face. I did not listen to that voice. That voice gets people killed, or worse, it gets them declared crazy. Because here is the ugly truth I had spent my whole career watching play out from the other side of the table. When you scream that someone is poisoning you, without proof, without a paper trail, without one single thing a stranger can hold in their hands, you do not sound like a victim. You sound exactly like the sick, paranoid woman your husband has spent 6 months telling everybody you are. Grant did not just have a plan. He had built the whole thing so that my fear would be the final piece of evidence against me. The angrier I got, the crazier I looked. He had made a room with no door in it, and he expected me to spend the rest of my life proving I belonged inside. So I was not going to give him fear. I was going to give him a case. The first thing you do in a fraud examination is preserve the evidence before the other side knows you are looking. You do not tip your hand. You do not confront. You gather quietly in the order that will survive a courtroom, and you do not move on anybody until the whole thing is built and there is nowhere left for them to run. I started with the pills. Every night, 3 capsules under the tongue, spit into a tissue, sealed in a sandwich bag, dated in my own handwriting, and locked in the lacquered box. If Frey had prescribed them, there would be a prescription. If there was no prescription, or if what was in those capsules did not match the label, that was not a symptom anymore. That was a chain of custody. The second thing you do is you find the money. And to find the money, I needed somebody who still had legitimate keys to the building. I called Owen Fairbanks from a cheap prepaid phone I bought with cash at a gas station on Savannah Highway, because I was not about to make this call on a phone Grant paid the bill for. Owen came to me 12 years ago, a kid fresh out of school who could not afford a decent suit, and I taught him everything I knew about following a dollar until it confesses. He runs half my active cases now, and the second he heard my voice on that line, he went quiet in a way that told me something was already wrong. Adele, he said, oh my God, where have you been? Grant told us 3 weeks ago that you were stepping back to focus on your health. He said you did not want the stress of calls or visits. He said you specifically did not want to hear from me. I closed my eyes and I leaned my head against the cold tile of the bathroom wall. Grant told me you were happy to take over more of the load, I said. He told me you understood. He told me I was too foggy to be useful, and that everyone at the firm agreed it was kinder if I just rested. Neither of those things was true, Owen said slowly, and I could hear him doing the same math I had done on that closet floor, watching the lie reveal its own shape. Neither of those is true, Adele. I know, I said. Owen, listen to me, and do not say anything out loud until I finish. My husband is trying to have me declared incapacitated so he can sell the firm. He is working with a private equity partner named Sloan Merritt, and I have very good reason to believe he has been putting something in my medication for months to fake the symptoms. There was a long, terrible silence. Then when he spoke again, the shock was gone and something else was in its place, the flat, cold focus I had spent 12 years training into him. What do you need? He said. I need you to preserve everything, I told him. Not from Grant's personal machine. Do not touch his laptop. Do not touch his email. Do not do one single thing you are not legally allowed to do, because if you do, you hand them the excuse to throw all of it out. I am still the founder, my credentials still work. Use the firm's own internal audit system, the one I built, the one every partner agreed to when they signed on. Pull the trust account, pull the operating account, pull every vendor we have paid in the last 18 months. And Owen do it quiet. I remember him exhaling. Then he said the thing that made me trust him all over again. Adele, if I pull the trust account and something is wrong in there, that is client money. That is not just fraud. That is the kind of thing that ends careers and puts people in prison. You understand what you might be asking me to find. I understand exactly what I am asking you to find, I said. Then I called Meredith Voss. Meredith and I have been circling each other for 20 years. She used to be opposing counsel, and she was the only lawyer who ever made me genuinely nervous on a witness stand because she did her homework and she never once tried to bully me. She just quietly built a wall of facts until there was nowhere for anybody to stand. I always told myself if I were ever in real trouble, she was the person I would want. I did not think I would ever have to find out. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, she asked me exactly 2 questions. Do you have proof? She said. Not yet, not enough, but it's coming. Then here is what you do until it does, she said. You do not confront him. You do not sign a single piece of paper. Not a birthday card, not a grocery list, nothing with your name on it. And you do not eat, drink, or swallow one thing you cannot personally account for. Are we clear? We're clear, I said. And Adele, she added, and her voice changed just slightly. South Carolina is a one-party consent state. That means if you are part of a conversation, you are allowed to record it. Nobody else's permission required. You understand what I am telling you. I understood exactly what she was telling me. She was telling me that every time my husband stood in a room with me and confessed, the law would let me keep it. Owen called back on the prepaid 2 days later, and his voice was different. Flat, careful. The voice of a man who has found the body and does not want to say so out loud yet. I found it, he said. It is not subtle once you know to look, but he buried it well enough that nobody who trusted him would ever have looked. $2.5 million, Adele. Gone out of the trust account and the operating fund over the last 14 months. Where, I said. 4 vendors, he said, consulting outfits. Forensic support subcontractors, supposedly, except I ran them. No employees, no offices. 2 of them share a mailing address that is a UPS box. And here is the part that made my stomach drop. Every one of those 4 shells traces back through a registered agent to Meridian Crossing Capital. Sloan's Fund, I said. Sloan's Fund, Owen said. It never left in one big transfer. That is why nobody caught it. It went out in little bites, consulting fees, emergency case support, retainers for work that never happened. Every one of them approved under Grant's credentials. I sat with that for a second. It was almost funny, in the blackest possible way. I had spent my whole life finding exactly this: money broken into small, honest-looking pieces and walked out the back door by somebody the owners trusted too much to double-check. Theft in a firm never looks like a guy with a mask climbing through a window. It looks like an invoice. It looks like paperwork nobody read past the first page, signed off by the one person nobody thought to question. There's more, Owen said, and I am not sure yet what it means, but it is going to matter. Grant has been on calls with Meridian people, and the number he keeps throwing around is not the firm's real valuation. He keeps telling them the Atwater monitorship comes with the sale. He is telling them it is worth $40 million over 5 years, and that it transfers when the firm changes hands. Everything in me went still, because I knew something Grant did not. I had won the Atwater monitorship 6 weeks earlier. A federal judge had appointed an independent monitor to oversee a company caught cooking its books. A 5-year job worth exactly the $40 million Grant was bragging about. But a monitorship like that is not a firm asset. It is not a contract you can sell like a used car. The court did not appoint Ridgway Forensic. The court appointed me. Adele Ridgway, personally by name, because of my license and my testimony record and 30 years of a reputation nobody could buy. It is written into the appointment order in plain black ink. It does not transfer, and the day control of the firm changes hands, it terminates on its own. Grant was standing in front of the woman he was going to run away with, dangling a $40 million number that did not exist because he had never once in 6 years understood the difference between what a firm does and what a firm actually owns. He had learned to say occupancy and margin and valuation. He had never learned the bones underneath. He thought he was selling an empire. He was about to sell a nameplate and a stack of bills. Don't correct anybody, I told Owen. Not one word, let him keep saying 40. The more he sells them on a number that isn't real, the more they'll pay for something that's worth less than nothing. Just keep gathering and keep it quiet. I hung up and I stood in my own kitchen, in the house I had paid for, and for the first time in months, I did not feel like I was disappearing. I felt like myself, the version of me that men in expensive suits used to underestimate right up until the day the whole thing came down on their heads. Before I tell you what I found next, the part that stopped being about money and started being about something a courtroom cannot give back, let me ask you something. Wherever you are watching from, have you ever had somebody decide you were too old, too tired, too far gone to notice what they were doing right in front of your face? If you have, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, you are going to want to see how this ends. The money was cold, the money I understood. Ordinary crooks steal money, and money leaves a trail, and a trail can be followed, and what is taken can sometimes be given back. What I found 3 days later did not leave that kind of trail. It could not be given back by any judge alive, because the next thing I went looking for was not a dollar. It was the reason my daughter had stopped calling me, and the answer was going to be the worst thing I learned in all of this. I had been so focused on the money and the pills that I almost missed the other thing. That is the trap in this kind of work. You get your teeth into the fraud you can prove, the dollars and the dosages, the clean, cold facts, and you forget that the people running these schemes are almost never only after the money. The money is what they want. Isolation is what they need first, because a woman surrounded by people who love her is hard to steal from. A woman alone is easy. It was Owen who found it, and he did not go looking for it. He was pulling my account access logs, building the timeline of who had been into the firm's systems and when, and buried in there was my personal email. Not the firm account, my own. And the logs showed messages going out of it, dozens of them, over the better part of a year, on days I knew for a fact I had not been anywhere near a computer. Some of them went out at 2, 3 in the morning, and every single one of them went to the same place. My daughter. Owen sent me the thread through the prepaid, and I sat on the edge of my bed at 11 o'clock at night, and I read almost a year of my own name saying things I had never said. Tessa is 33 now. She lives in Denver. She is a hospice nurse, geriatric care, which is a thing I used to be so damn proud of that I would find ways to work it into conversations with strangers. My daughter takes care of dying people, I would say. She sits with them so they are not alone. She has done it for 10 years. There is not a lot in this world I have been prouder of than that. And it was exactly that, her whole life's work, that made her the single most dangerous person to Grant's entire plan. Because Tessa has spent a decade in rooms with people whose minds are actually failing. She knows what real cognitive decline looks like from the inside, hour by hour, the way you only can when you have held someone's hand through it 100 times. If my daughter had sat with me for one afternoon, she would have known in 20 minutes that what was happening to me was not dementia. She would have seen the spikes. She would have asked what I was taking. She would have blown the whole thing wide open before Frey ever filed a word. Grant knew that. Of course he knew that. So he did not just push her a little further away. He cut her off at the root, and he used my own voice to do it. The first message was from almost a year back. I read it twice before I understood I was looking at something Grant had written and signed with my name. Tessa, I need you to respect my space right now. Your constant questions about the business and about Grant are making my condition worse. Please stop calling. I need peace. I will reach out when I am ready. I never wrote that. I never felt that. I had spent that entire month wondering why my daughter had suddenly gone quiet, and Grant had been right there at the dinner table, so sympathetic, telling me she was angry about the trust, telling me she thought the firm should already be hers, telling me she only ever called when she wanted something, and I had believed him. God help me, I had believed him, because it was the months when my head was full of fog and every hard conversation felt like climbing a mountain, and his explanation was so much easier to swallow than the pain of picking up the phone. That is how it works. Isolation does not start with a locked door. It starts with someone handing you a reason that hurts less than the truth. I kept reading. It got worse. There were messages from Tessa in that thread too, the ones that had actually come from her. And Grant had read every one and answered them as me, and then made sure I never saw them. She had not stopped reaching out. She had kept reaching out over and over for months into what she must have thought was a wall of her mother's silence. One of them said, "Mom, I do not understand what I did. Please just tell me what I did and I will fix it." One of them said, "I talked to Aunt Carol, and she says you seem fine on the phone with her, so why won't you talk to me?" And Grant, as me, had written back to that one. He had written, "Carol does not see what Grant sees every day. I am not fine, Tessa, and your refusal to accept that is part of why I cannot have you here. If you show up uninvited, I will have to ask you not to come in." I put the phone down on the bedspread because my hands had started to shake, and this time it was not the pills and it was not an act. I had to walk to the window and stand there and breathe. He had used me to threaten my own child. He had taken the one relationship in my life that money could never touch, and he had gotten in between us wearing my face, and he had done it so patiently, so quietly, one small poisoned message at a time, that neither of us ever caught him. And the thing that gutted me, the thing I keep coming back to even now, is that he did not have to invent very much. The most effective lies are not built out of nothing. They are built on top of something real, something you already half believe, something you are already a little afraid of. Tessa and I had argued about the trust years ago, once badly. She had moved across the country and built a life that did not orbit around me and my firm, and some small selfish part of me had felt left behind by that. She had her own fears too. She was afraid I would learn later that I would always choose Grant and the company over her, the way she felt I had chosen the work over her father's memory after he died. Grant did not create those fears. He just found them, both of them, hers and mine, and he fed them in the dark until they grew into a wall between us tall enough that neither one of us could see the other one on the far side, still reaching. There was one more message, the most recent one, from only 6 weeks earlier. Tessa had sent it, and Grant had read it, and Grant had never answered it, just let it sit there in the dark where he thought it would die. It said, "Mom, I am not asking about the firm. I do not want the firm. I never wanted the firm. I just want to know why you stopped loving me. That is all. I just want my mom back." I read that line and then I read it again and I could not read it a third time. Money can be traced. I have built a whole life on that one fact. You follow it and you follow it, and eventually it walks you right up to the person who took it, and a court can order it returned down to the last penny. Grant had stolen $2.5 million, and I already knew, sitting there, that I was going to get every cent of it back. But there is no ledger for the 14 months my daughter spent believing her mother had thrown her away. There is no account number for that. No judge on earth can sign an order that gives it back. Time is the one thing nobody has ever figured out how to return. I sat with the phone in my lap until the room went gray with morning, and somewhere in there, the cold in me changed into something else. It did not go away, it just got a direction. I had been building a case to save my company in my mind. That was the whole plan. Get the proof, protect the firm, put Grant where he could not reach me. And it was a good plan, and I was going to finish it. But it had been, up until that night, a case about a fraud. Numbers on one side, numbers on the other. Now it was about getting my daughter back, and that was a debt I did not yet know how to collect. Because it was owed in a currency I had spent my whole clever life pretending did not really count. I did not call Tessa that night. I wanted to. So badly it was a physical ache. But I knew that if I called her now, out of nowhere, sobbing, telling her a story about poison and a wheelchair and a locked room with no windows, I would sound like exactly the woman Grant had spent a year building me into. She had a year of my own voice pushing her away. One phone call was not going to undo that. Nothing I could say would undo that. I was going to have to show her instead. I was going to have to take the whole thing all the way down. in front of witnesses, with proof in my hands that a stranger could hold, and let my daughter watch her mother stand back up. And then, only then, when there was nothing left of Grant's version of me to argue with, I would find out whether 14 stolen months could ever be built back, one careful board at a time. But that was still weeks away. First, Grant needed his public proof that I was slipping, and I had decided I was going to give it to him, all of it. More than that son of a bitch ever dreamed of. The Ridgway forensic firm was holding its annual recognition dinner that Friday in front of 200 people who had known me at the top of my game. Grant thought I was going to embarrass myself. He was right. I was going to embarrass myself so thoroughly that not a single person in that room would ever doubt his story again. Here is the thing most people get wrong about how you take a competent adult and turn her into a ward of the court. They think it happens in one dramatic afternoon. A doctor signs a paper, a judge bangs a gavel, and just like that, a person loses the right to run her own life. It does not work that way, and Grant knew it did not work that way, and that was the source of the one pressure he could not fully control: time. In South Carolina, you cannot just declare a woman incapacitated on one doctor's say-so. There has to be a petition. The court appoints a guardian ad litem, an independent set of eyes whose entire job is to look out for the person being petitioned against. There has to be an independent examination, not just the report of the physician the family hired. The person gets notice, the person gets a hearing. It is slow, and it is adversarial, and it is designed on purpose to be hard, because the people who wrote that process understood that the power to erase a person's autonomy is the kind of power that gets abused by exactly the people closest to her. Frey's report alone was not going to be enough. Grant needed more. He needed the kind of proof that does not live on paper. He needed witnesses. He needed a room full of respected people to watch Adele Ridgway come apart at the seams, so that when the guardian ad litem started making calls, everybody they talked to would already have the same story ready to go. She has really gone downhill. It is so sad. Grant has been a saint about it. And that is why the annual recognition dinner was, from Grant's point of view, a gift from God. 200 people, colleagues, litigators I had worked across from for decades, two of my own senior partners. All of them gathered in one ballroom, all of them primed by 6 months of Grant's quiet, sorrowful updates. All I had to do was fall apart in front of them, and Grant would have his witnesses handed to him gift-wrapped. So that is exactly what I decided to give him, because a performance runs in one direction only when one person is directing it. Grant thought he was the director. He had forgotten that I had spent 30 years reading rooms for a living, and that there is nobody on earth better at controlling a story than the person everybody has agreed to stop listening to. He helped me get dressed that night. He stood behind me at the mirror and fastened the clasp of a necklace around my throat, and he watched my face in the glass the whole time, not like a husband, like an appraiser. "You do not have to say anything tonight," he told me, soft and warm. "Just stay close to me and smile. If it gets to be too much, you squeeze my hand and I will get you out of there." "Okay, sweetheart." "Okay," I said. I wrote a few words, though. Owen printed them for me. Just a thank you. His fingers went still on the clasp for half a second. "That was before things got difficult," he said gently. "Maybe it is better if I just say a few words on your behalf." "I can still read, Grant. Nobody said you couldn't," he said in the exact tone a person uses to correct a child without making the child cry. "But if you lose your place up there in front of everyone, that could be upsetting." "For you, for me," I said. "For everyone," he said. And there it was, right out in the open if you knew how to hear it. He was not worried about my dignity. He was worried I might not fall apart on schedule, and he was trying to keep me off the stage entirely in case I stayed upright, which told me the stage was exactly where I needed to be. I let my shoulders sag. I looked down at the little printed speech in my hands like it had gotten heavy. "Maybe you're right," I said. Relief moved across his face, plain as day. "I will introduce you," he said, and kissed my temple, and left the room feeling like he had won something. He always felt like that. It was going to cost him everything. The second the door shut, I unfolded the pages, and I want you to understand what he had done, because it tells you everything about the kind of man he was. He had swapped my speech. The pages Owen printed for me were gone, and in their place was a version Grant had made, shorter, clumsier, salted with wrong dates and wrong names, and one paragraph that simply did not make sense. If I read it out loud exactly as written, I would sound confused, and the blame would land on my mind, not his edit. And if I noticed the swap and said something, well, then I was paranoid, accusing my devoted husband of tampering with a thank you note. He had built the trap so that either door I walked through, I lost. That is what these people do once they start believing they are smarter than everyone in the room. They do not just prepare the lie, they prepare your reaction to the lie. They script both of you. So I decided to give him a third door, one he had not thought to build, because it never occurred to him that I might fall apart on purpose with my eyes open aiming. I folded his pages and slipped them into my clutch, and I walked out to give the performance of my life. The ballroom was full when I came down. For 28 years, these people had known me as the woman you called when the numbers did not add up, and careers and prison sentences hung on the answer. Now they watched me come down the stairs, on Grant's arm like I was made of glass, and I could feel the room adjusting itself around me, the little softening of faces, the pity arriving early. Pity is a strange thing. It is almost never cruel on purpose. But it can shrink a person faster than hatred ever could, because hatred at least treats you like a threat. Pity just looks around for the nearest chair to sit you down in. The first part of the night, I played small. I let Grant answer questions that were put to me. I smiled and thanked people and stayed on his arm. And then when I judged the room was watching, I started to work. I called Arthur Delaney by his late brother's name. Arthur was one of the first attorneys who ever trusted me with a real case, a decent man, and his smile faltered and he said gently, "It's Arthur Adele." And I put my hand to my mouth and said, "Of course, of course, I'm so sorry." And Grant materialized at my elbow inside of 3 seconds. "She's had a long week," he said, and Arthur nodded, but the pity was already in his eyes, already spreading to the two people standing with him. 10 minutes later, I asked a server where the ladies' room was. In a hallway I had walked 100 times, in a building I could have drawn from memory. Then I wandered toward the service doors and let Grant steer me back in front of my own partners, Gordon Sable and Deborah Frayne, both of whom watched him redirect me with a hand on my elbow and a soft "this way, sweetheart." I saw Gordon glance at Deborah. That one glance was worth more to Grant than Frey's entire report, and he knew it, and I let him have it. When they called me up, I carried Grant's sabotage speech to the podium, and I read it. I said 23 years when the firm was 28 years old, and I frowned at the paper, and I said no 30, and a murmur went through the room. I skipped a line and repeated another. I called the recognition committee by the wrong name. Every mistake cost me something real. I could feel it in the way old employees looked down into their drinks, in the way the younger ones stopped looking at me and started looking at Grant, checking his face to know how to feel. There is a particular humiliation in that, and it is not the humiliation of looking weak. It is the humiliation of knowing you could stop it with one clear sentence and choosing not to, because the truth would arrive too early and ruin everything. And then near the end, I looked out toward the ballroom doors, and I let my face go soft and hopeful, and I said, "Is Tessa here yet?" She said she'd help me with the flowers. The room went dead quiet. Grant was up on that stage in a heartbeat. "Adele," he said softly, taking the pages out of my hands. "Tessa's in Denver, honey." And I looked at him with big confused eyes and I said, "She's 17. She said she'd come." And every person in that room who knew my daughter knew Tessa was 33, and a woman near the front pressed her fingers to her lips. And Grant put his arm around me and said to the room, "I'm sorry, everybody. Some nights are harder than others." And he walked me down off that stage while 200 people applauded, not for anything I had said, but to rescue me from the silence. It worked exactly the way he wanted, and it was the single most useful thing I did all week. Because later, when the speeches were done and the room had loosened into drinks and low conversation, I was sitting by myself near the tall windows, playing tired, playing gone, when Sloane Merritt crossed the room and crouched down beside my chair like you would beside a child or an old dog. "You were very brave tonight," she said. warm as anything, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. Then she leaned in closer, and she dropped her voice, and she said the rest just for me, because she was certain, absolutely certain, that the confused old woman in the chair had no idea what any of it meant. After tonight, she said, nobody is going to fight the petition. Half your own partners just watched you ask for a 17-year-old daughter. Frey files, the court moves, and Grant has control inside a month. She smiled. We close before the monitorship goes public and the valuation jumps. 40 million tied up in a bow. She actually patted my hand. It really is a beautiful firm, Adele. It's a shame you won't remember building it. I kept my eyes on the dark window and the rain running down it. I let them stay unfocused. I did not give her one thing. And across the room, Grant thought no one was watching, and he crossed to Sloane and put his hand at the small of her back and kissed the side of her head, quick, easy, the gesture of a man who has stopped bothering to hide. I had my phone in the clutch in my lap, and it had been recording since before Sloane knelt down. Every word, in a one-party consent state, sitting in a conversation she chose to have with me, in a room I was legally in. Her voice, the petition, the timeline, the 40 million, the shame you won't remember building it. All of it, mine to keep. They thought they had just destroyed my credibility in front of the only people whose opinion could save me. What they had actually done, both of them, in the space of one evening, was tell me the exact shape of the whole plan and hand me their own voices saying it out loud. Sloane told me the legal timeline. Grant showed me the affair. And neither of them ever once considered that the woman they had spent all night propping up and pitying and patting on the hand had walked into that ballroom on purpose to lose so that they would finally feel safe enough to say everything where I could catch it. I let Grant take me home. I let him tell me in the car how sorry he was that the evening had been so hard on me. I said I was tired. I said I just wanted to sleep. And I sat in the dark of my own passenger seat with 200 witnesses to my ruin behind me, and a recording in my lap that was worth more than every one of them. And I thought, one down, two to go. Grant moved faster after that night, and I knew why. Sloane's money was already sitting in escrow, waiting, and money that is waiting has a way of shortening a greedy man's patience. He had told her a month, but every day that petition sat unfilled was a day her 18 million earned nothing, and her nerves got a little worse. And Grant was not the kind of man who could stand being the one keeping a beautiful woman waiting. So he decided to stop waiting on the court and take a shortcut. He came into the breakfast room on a Tuesday morning with a leather folder under his arm, and that particular calm on his face, the calm of a man who has already forgiven himself for what he is about to do. Sunlight was coming in hard off the harbor behind him, catching the silver on the table, making the whole room too bright. I was sitting there in my robe stirring a cup of coffee. I had no intention of drinking, and up on the shelf behind me, tucked inside an old mantel clock I had owned for 20 years, a small camera Owen had helped me place was recording everything. I need you to sign a few things, sweetheart, he said, and set the folder down next to my hand. Just routine. Insurance updates and medical authorization so I can talk to Frey's office for you. Nothing complicated. Nothing complicated. People always reach for the small words when they are asking you to hand over something enormous. Sign a few things, just routine. It is the same voice a man uses to walk a spooked horse into a trailer. Today, I said, like I was having trouble holding on to the word. It has to be today, he said, and under the softness there was that thread of urgency. Pulled tight. Frey's office needs the authorization before your appointment, and the insurance stuff has a deadline. He pulled out the chair beside me and sat down close, his knee against mine. You trust me, don't you, Adele? I looked at him. I looked at the man I had led into every private corner of my life. The man I had married 3 years after I buried Tessa's father, when I was so lonely I had mistaken attention for understanding. Trust is a strange thing. People talk about it like it is a gift you hand to another person. But in a marriage, it stops being a gift and becomes infrastructure. You build your days on it, your decisions, whole years. And when it turns out the beam was rotten the entire time, you do not just lose your faith in one man. You start wondering which parts of your own life were ever standing on solid ground. Of course I trust you, I said. He opened the folder. and he had built it exactly the way I would have expected a man like Grant to build it. The first page was harmless, a release for medical records. The second let him speak to the insurance company. But underneath those, where a tired and frightened woman would never think to look, were the real pages. A durable power of attorney, access to every account, personal and firm, authority over the voting interest, and the right to approve the sale of Ridgeway Forensic. He had stacked them so that my signature on the innocent top sheet would seem to flow down through all the rest, like I had known, like I had agreed. "Where do I sign?" I asked. Relief flickered across his face. He put a heavy fountain pen in my hand and pointed to the first line, and I let my fingers shake around it, let the nib scratch and wander. And I said, "I can't hold it steady, Grant." "Take your time," he said. "Maybe Meredith should look at these first." The softness went out of his eyes like a light switching off. "Meredith doesn't represent you anymore," he said. "She called me." She withdrew. He was watching my face when he said it, waiting to see if the lie would land, and I made it land. I touched my temple. I frowned when I said, "I don't remember that." "Weeks ago," he said, and his shoulders came down half an inch. "You did. You just don't remember." He slid the pages closer. "Sign here." And I lowered the pen, and I stopped again, and this time I let a little clarity into my voice, just enough. "What am I selling, Grant?" "Nothing," he said too fast. "This one says Ridgeway Forensic. It authorizes routine management, Adele. We have been over this." "I don't think we have." He took a slow breath through his nose. He glanced at the doorway to make sure no one was in the house, and then he leaned in close. And the thing he had been holding under all that patience for 6 months finally came up into his face. "You are not capable of understanding this anymore," he said. Quiet, flat, there was not one drop of concern left in it. "That is why I have to handle it." I let my eyes fill up with confusion. "But it's my company," I said, "not for much longer." The words were out of his mouth before he could stop them, and I watched him hear himself say them, and I watched him decide it did not matter, because who was I going to tell? He put his hand over mine on the table and pushed the pen down toward the line. I resisted just a little, just enough that he had to push harder. His fingers closed around my wrist and tightened. "Grant," I said. "You're hurting me, then stop fighting me," he said. "I want to read it." "You can't read 3 pages without losing your place," he snapped, and he pulled my hand down, and the nib tore a little line across the paper. And then, low and vicious, close to my ear, the truth came pouring out of him like something that had been under pressure for years. "Do you have any idea what it has been like?" he said. 6 years. 6 years of people calling me Adele Ridgway's husband. 6 years of standing next to you while you made every last decision and I did the actual work, and everybody in that ballroom looked at me like I was your accessory. "I gave you a home," I said softly. "I saved you from bankruptcy. And made damn sure I never forgot it," he said. "I never once used it against you. You didn't have to. Everybody knew whose money it was." His face was inches from mine now, and his thumb was grinding into the bruise it was already making. "You told me you were proud of me," he said, and he laughed, one short, ugly sound with nothing in it. "I said what you needed to hear. That one landed somewhere the wrist never could. Because a confession like that does not just tell you the present is a lie. It reaches back and pours poison over the whole past. Every moment I had remembered as partnership, he had been sitting in as humiliation. Every time I thought I was being generous, he had been keeping a tally. He had rewritten 6 years of my life while I was living it, and I never knew, and the not knowing was its own kind of theft. "I gave you 6 years," he said, forcing the pen down. "The least you can do is leave me something worth having." So I let him. I let my hand drag across that line, and I made sure the thing that came out the other end was a broken, palsied scrawl that looked nothing on God's earth like the signature I have put on 10,000 legal documents. He did not notice. He was too busy watching what he thought was the moment he finally won. He turned the page and made me do it again, and again, until every authorization carried the same distorted mark. And by the time he let go of my wrist, there was a dark bruise coming up on the skin, purple and clear as a fingerprint, which in a way is exactly what it was. "There," he said, breathing harder than the work required. He gathered the pages up quick. "That wasn't so hard." I cradled my wrist against my chest. "Are you angry with me?" I asked, small and scared. And just like that, the mask came back down. Because as far as he knew, the dangerous part was over, and he had gotten what he came for. No, sweetheart, he said, and he kissed the top of my head. No, I'm trying to protect you. He stood up with the folder under his arm and walked into the study to make his call. And I sat there with my wrists throbbing and the little camera and the clock still running, and I heard the whole thing. It's done, he said. Then Sloane's voice tinny through the speaker. She signed everything? She didn't even know what she was signing, Grant said. Any trouble? A little. I had to guide her hand. He laughed. You should see the signature. Looks like a kid wrote it. I want to tell you that I was calm listening to that. I was not. Sitting there with the bruise blooming on my arm and my husband in the next room laughing at my broken handwriting to the woman he was leaving me for, I felt something come up in me so hot and so total that I almost stood up. I almost walked in there and told him, in plain, clear English, that Meredith had never withdrawn, that I had recorded every word, that I knew about the 2.5 million and the shell companies and Sloane's fund, that I knew what he had done to Tessa. I wanted to watch his face fall. God, I wanted it. But wanting it was the trap. Confrontation right then would have given him one thing, and one thing only: warning. And a warned man reads the attachments. A warned man calls his lawyer and slows everything down and starts covering the tracks I had spent weeks laying bare. Anger buys you a few seconds of feeling powerful. Patience lets the whole thing ripen until it falls into your hand. So I stayed in that chair and I let him laugh. My prepaid buzzed in the pocket of my robe an hour later, once Grant had left for the office with his folder full of worthless paper. It was Meredith. Owen had already sent her the recording and the footage. Adele, she said, and her voice was tight. He put his hands on you. We have him on tape saying she didn't know what she was signing. That is coercion. That is financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. That is enough. I can have investigators pick him up today. We do not have to let this go 1 hour further. And I understood, listening to her, that she was right about the law and wrong about the moment. Because if they arrested Grant today, this all became a case about a bad husband. He would hire a lawyer who would call it a marriage falling apart, ugly but not criminal. Frey would call my accusations paranoia and point at his own diagnosis. And Sloane would be on a plane to somewhere with no extradition before the ink dried, $40 million richer in her own imagination, and the story would become that Grant acted alone, a lone bad actor, and the whole conspiracy would collapse into one man's word against a sick old woman's. Not yet, I said. Adele, he bruised you, I know. I looked down at my wrist. Meredith, the money moves at the closing. Sloane has to be there in person. Everybody has to sign the same transaction at the same table. If we take him now, she walks, and half of them walk with her. I need them all in one room, all reaching for the same 40 million. At the exact moment it turns to smoke in their hands. There was a long silence on the line. She hated it. I could feel her hating it. But she had spent 20 years building walls of fact one brick at a time, and she knew, even furious, that I was right. The investigators will be inside the room, she said finally. That is not a request, and there will be people close to you the entire time. If he lays a hand on you again, we move, plan or no plan. Agreed, I said. Before I let you do this, she said, I have to ask you one thing, and I need the honest answer. If someone you had loved and trusted had done all of this to you, poisoned you, stolen from you, turned your own daughter against you with your own voice, would you be able to sit across a table from him and smile and wait when you could end it that same afternoon? Could you do that? Or would you have to burn it all down the second you got the chance? I sat with the phone against my ear, and I looked out at the gray harbor, and I gave her the truest answer I had. I have spent my whole life, I said, watching guilty people lose because they could not wait. I am not about to lose because I couldn't either. The closing was set for the following week at the offices of Meredith's firm, Neutral Ground, a place with my people in the walls, and Grant none the wiser. Grant thought he was walking his sick wife in to sign away her life's work in a wheelchair. He had even arranged a car to take me away afterward, to a memory care facility up in the mountains near Asheville, a few hours off, where he figured no one would visit often enough to notice anything wrong. He was right that by the end of that day, One of us was going to be leaving in the back of a locked vehicle. He just had the name wrong. The offices of Voss and Associates took up the top floor of a converted cotton warehouse down on the water, all exposed brick and tall old windows, and Meredith had put the closing in the big conference room at the end of the hall. Grant thought that was a coincidence. He thought a lot of things. He thought it was neutral ground picked by Sloane's people, when in fact every person pouring coffee and every person sitting quietly against the wall belonged to me or to the state. He wheeled me in himself. That was important to him, I think, the wheelchair. He wanted the last image of Adele Ridgway, anybody in that room, carried out to be a small folded woman with a blanket over her knees, being pushed to the table by her devoted husband. He addressed me that morning like I was a doll, and he leaned down before we went in and told me, real gentle, that I did not have to do anything. Just let him guide my hand when it was time, and it would all be over soon. That part was true. It was going to be over soon, just not the way he meant. Sloane was already there in a deep red dress, standing at the head of the table like she owned the building, which in her head she nearly did. Two of her attorneys flanked her. An escrow officer sat with a laptop open. Gordon Sable and Deborah Frayne, my two partners, sat down the far side with the careful blank faces of people who have decided to look at the paperwork and not at the woman in the chair. A photographer Grant had hired stood near the wall, because Grant wanted a picture of what he kept calling the transition. The escrow officer read the terms out loud the way they always do. $18 million deposited and confirmed. Buyer Meridian Crossing Capital, accepting the firm together with all disclosed debts and obligations, and here she read the list. The long-term lease, the unearned retainers subject to refund, the severance guarantees, the tail coverage on the professional liability, a disputed clawback. Then she looked up, and one of Sloane's own attorneys shifted in his seat and said, for the record, that he wanted to confirm the buyer was waiving the extended due diligence period and proceeding. We are, Sloane said before he even finished. We have reviewed what we need to. And that was the whole thing, right there, though nobody in the room understood it but me. She had reviewed what she needed to. What she had reviewed were the numbers Grant fed her. She had never read the attachments, because Grant had spent weeks telling her the crown jewel of the firm was the Atwater monitorship, $40 million over 5 years, and that it came along with the sale. And Sloane wanted that number so badly that she had let it answer every question she was too greedy to ask. Grant pushed hard on the timeline too, told her the monitorship was about to go public, and the price would jump the second it did, so they had to close now. This week, no delays. Greed and a fake clock, that is how you get a professional to skip the reading. You make her feel like a careful person is a person who is about to lose the deal. Grant signed first, using the power of attorney he had bruised out of me at the breakfast table. He signed fast and confident. He did not slow down at the disclosure schedules. He did not ask why each of the firm's real assets sat under a separate agreement instead of on the balance sheet. He did not notice that the license to even use the Ridgway name terminated on a change of control. Greed had not made him blind exactly. It had just convinced him that reading carefully was a thing less fortunate people had to do. Then the escrow officer set a tablet on the blanket across my knees. Because this is a founder-owned firm changing hands, she said, we require a recorded acknowledgement from the original principal, even where an authorized representative has signed. Please confirm you are present and touch the field. That safeguard was not a fluke of banking. Meredith had built it into the structure herself, months earlier quietly, as a founder protection, precisely so that no sale could ever close without capturing the founder on the record at the very last second. Grant thought it was a formality. He crouched down beside my chair, all warmth for the room, and he said, it's just your insurance, sweetheart, like we talked about. And when I looked at the screen and said, in a small, lost voice, is this my insurance? One of my own partners looked down at the table, because I think some part of Gordon Sable knew, right then, that he was watching something wrong happen and had already decided it was easier not to be the one to say so. I don't remember, I whispered. I'll help you, Grant said, and he closed his fingers around my bruised wrist. the same wrist, in front of all of them, and pressed my thumb to the glass. A green check came up on the screen with a timestamp, and the tablet dutifully recorded the image of his hand wrapped around mine, forcing it down. The escrow officer watched her laptop 10 seconds. Then she nodded. Funds are released, she said. Transfer of Ridgeway Forensic is complete. Sloane let out a breath. She looked like she had been holding for months. A cork popped somewhere behind me. Grant stood up so fast he nearly knocked my chair, and Sloane came around the table and threw her arms around him, and he kissed her, full on, right there under the framed firm logo on the wall, and the photographer's flash went off. Grant probably imagined that picture would be the first image of his new life. What it actually was a photograph, time-stamped, of the exact instant a man connected his affair, a fraudulent transfer, and a plan to lock his wife away, all in one frame. To our future, Sloane said, lifting a glass. Grant leaned down close to my ear one more time, thinking he was whispering to a woman who would not remember it by morning. Tomorrow you wake up somewhere with no windows, he said, soft as a lullaby. And Sloane and I wake up owning everything you built. He straightened and gave a little nod to the two men by the door, the ones he thought were the transport team. Take her out, he said. One of them stepped forward and reached for the handles of my chair. I put my hands on the wheels and I locked them. He pushed. The chair did not move. He frowned and pushed again harder, and it still did not move. And now the room had gone quiet in that way a room does when something is not following the script. I reached down and I unclipped the belt across my lap and let it fall away. I pulled the blanket off my knees and folded it slow and set it on the seat. And then I put both my feet flat on the floor and I stood up. No shaking, no wandering eyes, no confusion. Just a 62-year-old woman standing up straight in a red room full of people who had spent an hour agreeing not to look at her. Grant's champagne glass slipped out of his hand and shattered on the floor by his shoe. Sloane's face went the color of the wall behind her. I smoothed the front of my jacket. I looked at my husband and then at the woman he had sold me to buy, and I spoke finally in the only language I have ever been truly fluent in, the language of numbers. $18 million, I said, for a firm carrying $21 million in disclosed debt and obligations. You really should have read the attachments. For a second, nobody moved. Sloane's glass was still halfway to her mouth. Her attorneys were staring at me, then at her, then back at me, doing the thing everyone in that room was now doing, which was trying to figure out which version of the last hour had been real. Sloane recovered first. How much did you understand? She said low, and I heard the fear come into it. Everything, I said. The dinner, the petition, the 40 million you thought was coming with the sale. So let me clear that last one up for you, since your team apparently couldn't. The Atwater monitorship is worth 40 million over 5 years. That part is true. But the court did not appoint this firm. It appointed me, by name, personally, because of my license and 30 years on the stand that you cannot buy in a purchase agreement. It does not transfer, and it terminated the moment control of the firm changed hands, which was about 90 seconds ago. Sloane's lead attorney was already flipping through the binder fast, and I watched his finger stop on a page, and I watched his face change. You did not buy an empire, I told her. You bought a management shell. The real estate, the name, the client database, the archives, the license itself, they all sit in entities that do not travel with an operations sale. What travels with it is $21 million in debt and a founder who, the second you have her declared incompetent, poisons the value of every case she ever testified on. Think about that. The whole worth of this firm is my credibility, and your entire plan depended on destroying it. You were going to spend a fortune making the one asset you were buying worthless. Reverse it, Sloane snapped at her attorney. Claim fraud. He didn't look up from the binder. The liabilities were disclosed, he said quietly. The ownership structure was disclosed. The non-transfer of the monitorship is disclosed. It's on page 41. You waived diligence over my objection. Because he, Sloane said, and her hand shot out toward Grant, he told me the firm owned everything. He told me she couldn't even understand it anymore. He said she couldn't move the assets if we closed fast enough. You had your own lawyers, Grant said, and just liked that they were not partners anymore. You picked the vendors, you ran the accounts, you approved the transfers. And there it was, the two of them turning on each other in front of a room full of witnesses, each one so busy shoving the blame at the other that they were laying the whole thing out for me without Meredith having to say a word. Partnerships built on greed are only strong as long as everybody is still getting paid. The instant it turns into a loss, loyalty becomes the thing everyone tries to hand to the person next to them. That is when I said, Meredith, now. The lights dimmed. A screen came down over the brick wall behind the table, and my own recordings started to play, in order, because Meredith and I had spent 2 days deciding on the order. Sloane's voice came first from the recognition dinner, kneeling by my chair. It's a shame you won't remember building it. The 40 million. The timeline, her own voice, clear as day, telling a woman she thought was gone exactly how they were going to erase her. Then the breakfast room, Grant's hand around my wrist, the pen tearing the paper, and his voice through the speakers, colder than anyone in that room had ever heard it. I gave you 6 years. The least you can do is leave me something worth having. Somebody near the back made a sound. Gordon Sable put his head down. Then Owen stepped up beside the screen, and the money came up, the 2.5 million broken into little bites, and walked out to 4 shell companies with no employees and no offices, every one of them tracing back through a registered agent to Meridian Crossing Capital. Every payment, Owen said, approved under Mr. Holloway's credentials, routed to entities controlled by Miss Merritt's fund Sloan. Owen said, you told him those invoices were clean. Grant, you told her the same. You were each stealing through the other, and neither of you checked. The last thing on the screen was a short chain of messages between Grant and Dr. Frey, emphasized the disorientation, strengthened the safety risk language. And under it, a consulting payment from a Meridian-linked account to a company owned by Frey's brother-in-law. One of the men against the wall touched his ear, listened, and nodded to Meredith. Dr. Frey is being detained for questioning right now, she said to the room. His records are being secured under a warrant as we speak. Grant's mouth opened and nothing came out. That recording is illegal, one of Sloane's attorneys tried. South Carolina is a one-party consent state, Meredith said without even turning around. Ms. Ridgway was a party to every conversation you just heard, in spaces she was lawfully present in, and the financial records were preserved through the firm's own audit system under her founder credentials. You are welcome to challenge admissibility later. Tonight the investigators are interested in the conducted documents. The men who had come to take me to Asheville crossed the room and took out their credentials, and they were not a transport team at all. Grant Holloway, one of them said, Sloane Merritt, you are being detained on suspicion of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, fraud, coercion, and conspiracy. Gordon Sable and Deborah Frayne, my own partners, sat very still, and then Owen put one more thing on the screen. 2 payment records, bonuses promised to both of them out of the deal proceeds, to be paid after the sale closed. They had not believed I was sick because the evidence said so. They had chosen to believe I was sick because believing it was worth money to them. Deborah started to cry. Gordon asked for a lawyer before anyone had even spoken to him. Grant came at me. He got 2 steps before security had his arms behind his back, and the look on his face was almost a child's, the pure outrage of a man who genuinely felt that the consequences were the betrayal. This firm was mine too, he shouted. I built it with you. No, I said. You stood next to what I built, and you waited for me to get weak enough to take it. That is not the same thing. It was never the same thing. And then, as they put the restraints on him, the anger drained out of his face and the old softness came back, the wounded look he had used on me for years whenever he needed something. Adele, he said, tell them this got out of hand. Tell them. Even then, even in handcuffs, he expected my love to still be sitting there, available, a spare key he could use whenever the consequences arrived. It didn't get out of hand, I told him. It ended exactly the way you designed it. You just weren't the one holding the pen. They took Sloane out first, then Grant. Red and blue light came up through the tall old windows and moved across the brick, across the broken glass, across a bottle of champagne still sweating in its bucket, over a celebration that had lasted about 4 minutes. I stood there in the middle of it and I looked down at my hands, and they were completely still. For months, my husband had taught 200 people to watch these hands for proof that I was disappearing. And now they hung at my sides, steady as a level, while his future was walked out through the lobby. I got my firm back, my name, my license, my mind, the right to decide where I sleep and what I swallow and who I let close. The petition was dismissed within the month. Frey lost his license and was charged with falsifying evaluations and taking hidden money. Sloane's investors froze her accounts when they learned she had pledged family assets against a shell. Grant was denied bail once the prosecutors laid out the medication reports and the coerced signatures and the plan to ship me across the state to a place no one would visit. Gordon and Deborah resigned. One of them is cooperating now. None of it felt the way people on the outside assume it must have felt. Justice draws a line and it hands out consequences, and that matters. It matters more than I can say. But it does not make the betrayal small. It just stops the person who hurt you from getting to keep writing the ending. Because there was one thing sitting in that whole pile of victory that no judge could give back to me. And she lived in Denver, and I still had to figure out how to call her. I did not call in the end, I drove. 3 months after they walked Grant out in handcuffs, I sat on the porch of a little weather-beaten rental house on the water outside Charleston, a place Tessa and I had come to a few times when she was small, back when her father was alive, and I still knew how to sit still. I had asked her to meet me there instead of at the firm, because the firm was the thing that had always stood between us, and I did not want it in the room. She pulled into the gravel drive a little after noon. For one bad second, I thought about going back inside. Facing Grant had been easier than this, if you can believe that. Grant I could beat. Grant gave me an enemy and a plan. Tessa brought no enemy. Tessa brought the possibility that I had believed a stranger's lies about my own daughter more readily than I had trusted her. And there are truths about yourself that no courtroom win will ever make comfortable. She got out in a dark raincoat, her hair pulled back, her face more guarded than I remembered it. She looked like me at 33, which I had never once noticed in a photograph. She was carrying a cardboard box. "Hi, Mom," she said. "Careful, even." "Hello, sweetheart," I said. We sat inside in the little glassed-in room that looks at the ocean with the box on the table between us. She took the lid off. It was full of paper. Letters, printed emails, birthday cards that had come back marked return to sender, screenshots. "I brought everything," she said. "I thought you should see what I actually sent. In case he told you I never did, I already knew." Owen had found the digital half of it. Messages Grant had sent has me, and the ones from her he had blocked. But this was the other half, the physical half, the letters she had put in real envelopes and mailed to a house where a man was pulling them out of the box before I ever came downstairs. One of them had been opened and taped shut again. Another had a note clipped to it in Grant's handwriting. "Do not deliver. Agitation risk." I read the most recent one, the one that matched the message that had gutted me at 11 o'clock on my bedroom floor. "Mom, I don't want the firm. I never wanted the firm. I just want my mother back. He did this, Tessa," I said. "Grant did this. But I need to say the other part out loud, because you deserve it true and not comfortable. He did it, and I made it easy for him. I let him become the person who explained you to me. I took his version because sitting with you honestly about how far apart we drifted would have cost me something, and I was a coward about it. Long before there was ever a pill in my coffee, I stopped reaching for you when reaching got hard. That part was mine." She looked out at the water for a while. Then she said, "I was angry at you for a long time, before any of this. I thought after Dad died, you just poured yourself into that firm, and there wasn't any room left for me. I thought the buildings mattered more." "They didn't," I said. "But I let you believe they did, because a broken foundation you can fix. There's a drawing for it and an inspection at the end. There was never a drawing for missing your father. So I fixed foundations instead, and I called it being strong." She didn't answer that with words. She got up and she came around the table, and she put her arms around me, and I held on to my daughter the way I had wanted. To the second she stepped out of that car. There was no big scene, no music, no instant forgiveness. None of the years since her father died suddenly handed back. Real repair is almost never a door that swings open. It is a damaged staircase, rebuilt one board at a time, both people testing their weight on each step before they trust it to hold. She stayed on the coast a while. She agreed, eventually, to come work with the firm, running the side of it I was never good at, the human side, the part that sits with people on the worst day of their lives. But when I offered to make her my successor outright, to just hand her the whole thing, she said no. I don't want to inherit a fixed relationship, Mom, she told me. I want to help fix it. That's different. It is different. She was right. She usually is. So I want to leave you with the one thing all of it taught me, and then I'll let you go. People think the opposite of being seen is being ignored. It isn't. The opposite of being seen is having somebody else decide who you are and tell everyone before you get the chance. For almost a year, a man I trusted stood between me and everyone who loved me, and he told them who I was. And they believed him because his version asked less of them than mine did. I spent my whole life proving that numbers don't lie, that if you follow them patiently enough, they'll tell you the truth about anybody. What I learned too late, and I'm still paying for how late, is that people leave a trail too. The ones who love you leave one, the ones using you leave one. For a while there, I stopped reading my own. I will never stop again. And if you've ever been underestimated by someone who is counting on it, subscribe. And remember, sometimes being the person nobody watches is the only advantage you'll ever need.